Jackie Robinson, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Reggie Jackson. All these names can be easily remembered when you think about great baseball players. But, more importantly, these were the pioneers who set up Major League Baseball for future generations of African American players. But, since 1959, when the amount of African American baseball players was at its peak, the numbers have declined, and declined in a very concerning manner. I mean, what's going on? Other major league sports, such as football and basketball, have had increasing numbers of African Americans since its segregation, to the point where African Americans are the majority. Why isn't baseball's percentage of African Americans increasing? First, let's look at the numbers.
When Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball in 1947 with the Brooklyn Dodgers, everyone held their breath. No one knew what was going to come out of it. Will it work out? Will it backfire right at the owners' faces? Thankfully, compared to the time when Robinson broke the color barrier, today there are a lot more African American players in the major leagues. But if we stand back and look at the big picture, there are 750 active Major League Baseball players. Out of 750, only 60 of them identify themselves as African Americans. That's roughly 8.05%. Now, let's look back to 12 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, 1959. Just like today, 750 active Major League Baseball players. But within 12 years, the number of African Americans had climbed from 1 to 129. That meant 17.25% of all players were African American. With this kind of growth, surely we'll one day have a league with even races, right? No. Since 1959, the numbers have dropped. Looking at this graph, we can see the drop of African American players on 10-year intervals. Now, looking at these numbers about baseball might lead you to think that other major league sports had the same issue with the amount of African American players. If you did, you're wrong. Let's look at the other two top major league sports, basketball and football.
The NBA was segregated 3 years after the MLB was, but the NBA's growth of African American player numbers were astonishing. Merely 8 years after integration, the percentage of blacks in the entire population was equal to the percentage of blacks in the NBA. This graph shows the constant growth of African American players in the NBA. And as you can see, by the early 1980s, you can see the transition from being the minority to being the majority race in the league. Today, 82% of all players in the NBA identify themselves as African American. Now, if you look at the NFL, although never fully segregated, there was never more than 2 active African American players until the 1950s. Although not as drastic as the NBA's growth, the NFL made a respectable growth in the African American player numbers. Recently, in the early 2000s, African Americans shifted from being a minority to the majority. Presently, 66.72% of all NFL players are African American.
So, what is going on? Why is it that baseball is having so much trouble getting African American players and keeping them, while other leagues have progressed to the point where African Americans are the majority? There are many reasons that could be used to explain this. But if you look closely, the overriding reason is its cost. Baseball is a very expensive sport, and the resources urban areas have are very limited. On average, baseball equipment for a little league player can go from $120 to $230 per player, which just includes a bat, a glove, and a pair of cleats. Cost of registering on a team can add another $200. average cost of playing basketball is about $9 to $22 per player, for which you just need a basketball and a pair of sneakers. Football, although not as affordable as basketball, costs about $65 per person to play. Another aspect of cost, not including the cost of playing, is the cost of exposure. As in, if you turn your TV on with the free basic cable on any Sunday during the football season, you're guaranteed to find at least 2 games in session. But to see a baseball game during any day of the season, you will have to be a paid subscriber to a cable TV provider. Other than these obvious factors, things like maintaining a perfectly landscaped baseball diamond and cost of hiring a mentor can also be problems.
Major League Baseball is aware of the fact that African Americans are on a decline in the game. Since realizing the problem, the MLB has started a program called RBI, Reviving Baseball in the Inner Cities. Since its conception, it has given over 1 million youths the opportunity to participate in baseball and softball programs in their local communities. Their greatest goal is to promote greater inclusion of minorities into the mainstream of the game. With strides like these being taken, we might soon see the number of African Americans in the MLB reach the benchmark set by the other major sports. Thank you. God bless America.